Unfortunately, it was not prepared, so I could not sing. Mono chalo niche nikitani. I'm going to try that first. This is a traditional Rambo Sangeet. It was written in Bengali by Ayodhyanath Pakrashi. And for an authentic translation, please refer to Volume 5, Chapter 3 of Sri Ramakrishna and His Divine Play. Um, I will read out a translation, but it is not authentic. Sung by young Narendranath in November 1881, during his first meeting with Sri Ramakrishna. In his own words, Master described, he sang that song with his whole soul, as though he were in deep meditation. When I heard it, I could not control myself. I went into ecstasy. These are Sri Ramakrishna's own words. So this is really a very sacred song for us. The translation is somewhat like this. Let's return, O mind, to our own true home. In alien land, in foreign guise, why roam? These elements and beings unknown, all alien, none are your own. Unconscious in the love of the exotic, why forget the one intrinsic? Let's return, O mind, to our own true home. In alien land, in foreign guise, why roam? Ascend the path of truth, O mind, guided by love's light. Carefully conceal your virtues as treasures, day and night. Robbers, greed, and delusion lurk in every corner. Beware, for travelers destitute they render. Carry calmness and self-control as your shield. In this journey, they are the weapons you wield. Let's return, O mind, to our own true home. In alien land, in foreign guise, why roam? Seek solace and direction in holy company. Their guidance will rejuvenate the weary. If ever dark doubts or fears cloud your way, in frenzied prayer call him as he holds sway. Even death bows to the ruler of this road, so fear not, his power lightens every load. Let's return, O mind, to our own true home, in alien land, in foreign guise, why roam? সংসার বিদেশে বিদেশীর বেশে ভ্রম কেন কারণে মন চলো নিজ নিকেতনে মন চলো নিজ নিকেতনে বিষয় পঞ্চক আর ভূত গান সব তোর পর কেউ নয় আপন বিষয় পঞ্চক আর ভূত গান সব তোর পর কেহ নয় আপন পর প্রেমে কেন হয়ে অচেতন ভুলিছ আপন জনে মন চলো নিজ নিকেতনে সত্য পথে মন করো আরোহণ প্রেমের আলো জ্বালি চলো অনুক্ষণ সঙ্গীতে সম্বল রাখো পুণ্য ধন গোপনে অতি যতনে লোভ মোহ আদি পথে দস্যুগণ পথিকের করে সর্বসমোষণ লোভ মোহ আদি পথে দস্যুগণ পথিকের করে সর্বসমোষণ পর যতনে রাখো রে প্রহরী সমদম দুই জনে মন চলো নিজ নিকেতনে সাধু সঙ্গ নামে আছে পান্থ ধাম শান্ত হলে তথায় করিবে বিশ্রাম পথ ভ্রান্ত হলে শুধাইবে পথ সে পন্থ নিবাসী জনে যদি দেখো পথে ভয়েরই আকার প্রাণপণে দিও দোহাই রাজার যদি দেখো পথে ভয়েরই আকার প্রাণপণে দিও দোহাই রাজার সে পথে রাজার প্রবল প্রতাপ সমন ডারে তার শাসনে মন চলো নিজ নিকেতনে মন চলো নিজ নিকেতনে সংসার বিদেশে বিদেশীর বেশে ভ্রম কেন অকারণে মন চলো নিজ নিকেতনে
Two more, at least.
This one Rini Mashi requested yesterday, so I'm going to sing that one. This is written by Swami Medhanandaji, and composed by Balabhadrananda. Yeah.
No, set to music by Balaram.
Right, set to music. Yeah, set to music. Yeah, that's right. And both of them visited actually within the last 1 year Hollywood Temple, right?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
Balaram himself sang this song on the way back from Santa Barbara. I was driving him back.
Oh,
So
wow.
I was very lucky.
He
What an
doesn't
honor,
sing
huh?
publicly.
No,
he
only
never
for-
sings
only for
you.
me.
Yeah. Yeah, but this is like
It's
music is done very professionally.
It's a great
Great
song.
song.
One of my favorites.
Yeah.
See, Rinima has a way of reading my mind. I'm on to you.
So again, I tried my hand at a little bit of translation here. Chetrisha jagile, tomare haravo, Chetrisha amar jagayona. The thirst that makes me lose you, do not awaken such thirst in me. The love that makes me forget you, do not distract me with such love. The lamp of knowledge that hides you, do not kindle such a light. That suffering that draws me near to you, do not take away that suffering. The passion that pulls me far from you, do not stir that passion in me. The joy that distances me from you, do not sweep me away in such a sea. The words that lack your name, do not make me listen to them. The tears that bring me close to you, do not dry those tears of mine. This, in some sense, is like Kunti's prayer in Bhagavad, do not take away the suffering, because, yeah, it's...
It reminds me of you a lot, yeah.
Yeah. Chitrisha jagi tumare harao, Chitrisha jagayona. Chitrisha jagi tumare harao, Chitrisha jagayona. যে ভালোবাসায় তোমারে ভুলিব, যে ভালোবাসায় তোমারে ভুলিব, সে ভালোবাসায় ভুলায় না। যে তৃষ্ণা জাগিলে তোমারে হারাবো, সে তৃষ্ণা জাগায় না। যে জ্ঞানের দ্বীপ তোমারে লুকায়, সে জ্ঞানের দ্বীপ জ্বালায় না। যে জ্ঞানের দ্বীপ তোমারে লুকায়, সে জ্ঞানের দ্বীপ জ্বালায় না। যে যাতনা পেলে তোমারে লোভিব, সে যাতনা মোর বুঝিও না। যে যাতনা পেলে তোমারে লোভিব, সে যাতনা মোর করিও না। যে দিশা তোমা ছাড়া করে সে নেশা জাগায় না, যে সুখ লোভিলে তোমারে ভুলিব, যে সুখ লোভিলে তোমারে ভুলিব, সে সুখ সাগরে রসায় না, যে তৃষা জাগিলে তোমারে হারাবো, সে তৃষা জাগায় না। যে কথার মাঝে তব কথা না, সে কথা আমারে শোনায় না, যে কথার মাঝে তব কথা না, সে কথা আমারে শোনায় না, যে আখি ঝরিলে তোমারে লোকিব, সে আখির ধারা বুঝায় না, যে আখি ঝরিলে তোমারে লোকিব, সে আখির ধারা বুঝায় না, যে তৃষা জাগিলে তোমারে হারাবো, সে তৃষা জাগায় না, যে ভালোবাসায় তোমারে ভুলিব, যে ভালোবাসায় তোমারে ভুলিব, সে ভালোবাসায় ভুলায় না, যে তৃষা জাগিলে তোমারে হারাবো, সে তৃষা জাগায় না। Okay, the next one I'm going to try is Rabindra Sangeet. Very beautiful words. আমার হিয়ার মাঝে লুকিয়ে ছিলে, দেখতে আমি পাইনি। You hid within my heart, unseen you remained. Thee I could never see. My eyes turned outward to the world, yet inward I never looked. In all my love, my wounds, my dreams, you were near, but I sought not thee. You were the joy in all my play, but lost in bliss, I let the days slip away. Hidden deep within in my songs of joy and sorrow, you gave the melody, yet I sang not of thee. আমার হিয়ার মাঝে লুকিয়ে ছিলে, দেখতে আমি পাইনি, তোমায় দেখতে আমি পাইনি। আমার হিয়ার মাঝে লুকিয়ে ছিলে, বাহির পানে চোখ মেলেছি, বাহির পানে আপন হৃদয় পানে চাইনি আমার হিয়ার মাঝে লুকিয়েছিলে, দেখতে আমি পাইনি তোমায়, দেখতে আমি পাইনি। আমার সকল ভালোবাসা, সকল আঘাত, সকল আশায়, আমার সকল ভালোবাসা, সকল আঘাত, সকল আশায় তুমি ছিলে আমার কাছে, তুমি ছিলে। আমি তোমার কাছে যাইনি, আমার হিয়ার মাঝে লুকিয়েছিলে, দেখতে আমি পাইনি তোমায়, দেখতে আমি পাইনি। তুমি আনন্দ হয়ে ছিলে আমার খেলা, তুমি আনন্দ হয়ে ছিলে আমার খেলা, আনন্দে মন ভেবেছিলে, আনন্দে মন ভুলেছিলে, কেটেছে দিন হেলা, গোপন রহি গভীর প্রাণে আমার দুঃখ সুখের গানে, গোপন রহি গভীর প্রাণে আমার দুঃখ সুখের গানে, সুর দিয়েছ তুমি, আমি তোমার গান তো গাইনি, আমার হিয়ার মাঝে লুকিয়েছিলে, দেখতে আমি পাইনি তোমায়, দেখতে আমি পাইনি।
Thank you, Vidurji. Thank you so much, Vidurji. It's always wonderful to have Vidurji. Thank you so much. Yeah, there's a people were. Thank you so much, everyone. By the way, there's a couple chairs here up front in case people are, if you guys want to move around a little bit. So we're going to just arrange this a little bit, and we're going to have Maharaj's talk on the science of happiness. So who's ready to be happy? I think all of us, right? So give us just a couple seconds here. But yeah, if anybody in the back wants to move their seats here, and we can move things around a little bit. He likes to, yeah. So there's a seat right there. Welcome, welcome. Your seat's right there. Let's make sure Maharaj has his throat. And I wanted to, since we have a couple of minutes, so I want to thank you all for coming, number one. And two, also tomorrow, our talk is going to be at the Hindu temple at 6 p.m. So,
Five.
is it 5? Okay, thank you. I only made the schedule, I should remember it. Right? So 5 p.m. and we're going to have the honor of having Badur do some chanting. And then also, then of course, Maharaj is talking. Did you
Sorry.
need it to be?
Yeah, because I'm gonna
Oh.
use it as a kind of laptop.
It's better then. Is that good? Which one of these do
Maybe
you want?
can we put the water on this just so that there's no accident?
Well, I can give you something else. You don't want this one?
No, that's it. That's good.
Okay. Maharaj Swami Medhanananda is a Swami at the Hollywood Temple of that's the Vedanta Society of Southern California. He's very popular on YouTube, all over the world. We're blessed to have him here today in Vegas.
Om Asato Ma Sadgamaya Tamaso Ma Jyotirgamaya Mrityorma Amritam Gamaya Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om, lead us from the transient to the eternal. Lead us from darkness to light. Lead us from death to immortality. Om, peace, peace, peace. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to day 2 of our wonderful Las Vegas retreat. Thank you so much to Jeff for organizing everything. I've had a wonderful time so far. He's a gracious host. Thank you so much to Bidurji for the second day of amazing singing. Very appreciative. And thank you all for coming from various parts of the state. I really appreciate it. And from other states also. So one could ask, what is most characteristic of this age? How would you define this age? Each of you should think about it for yourself. I grew up in Boston in the 80s and early 90s. And one thing that was really special about my upbringing is that half my childhood was pre-internet, the other half was post-internet. So I witnessed firsthand the changes wrought by the internet in day-to-day life. And it's extraordinary. Growing up, I had favorite TV shows. So to watch the next episode, I'd have to wait a full week. Right? Must See Thursday on NBC, whatever it was. Seinfeld, whatever. You have to wait at least one more week to get the next episode. Now what do we have? This thing called binge watching. So you can binge watch an entire show, an entire season of a show, let's say, in one day. Just watch it straight through. Gorge yourself on whatever you like, Game of Thrones or something, whatever. And this is true across the board with different things. Social media, pornography, dating sites, this, that, Tinder, a million things. There are so many different ways to get instant gratification in ways that were unimaginable even 30 years ago, thanks to the internet. And the internet is a double-edged sword because, of course, we all use it, and it's indispensable in many ways. And there are many, many, many positive benefits to the internet. We can't deny that. And yet, there's a dark side to it, right? And so if you were to ask me, how would I characterize our current age? I would say this is the age, an unprecedented age of instant gratification. We've always had instant gratification in many forms, but everything in life now, thanks to the internet, is oriented toward instant gratification. That's what I would suggest. And we've only begun to think about the consequences of this, of the internet, and how easy it is to get sucked into this vortex of instant gratification. You might be wondering, well, what's so bad about it? It could be a great thing. We're getting what we want, whenever we want, in as much quantity as we want. Isn't that a good thing? You might think so, logically speaking. And yet the paradox, the irony is that we are more miserable than ever. The more instantly gratified we are, the more we get what we think we want, the less happy we are. This is what I would call the paradox of instant gratification. It's really worth thinking about deeply. Why? I want X. I get as much of X as I want whenever I want, and yet I'm unhappier than I was before. How can this be? This is the subject of the talk. This is one of the main things that we'll be exploring. We don't even know what makes us happy, actually. That's one of the problems. That's what Vedanta says. What really makes us happy is what the kind of things that Vidya was talking about. Finding happiness within, because the divine is within us. And yet we roam all over the world looking for it outside us, but in fact it's within. So just to kind of give some concrete evidence for some of the claims I'm making about this paradox of instant gratification. There was a Mental Health America study published last year in 2023 called The State of Mental Health in America. And what they found is that over 1/5 of adults in the US were experiencing some form of mental illness. 1 out of 5 Americans experiences some form of mental illness. It's a massive number. It shot up. So that's over 50 million Americans. Over 1 in 10 youth in the US are experiencing depression that's severely impairing their ability to function at school or work, at home, with family, or in their social life. So mental health has become an extremely pressing issue in this current age. And I don't think it's a coincidence that this is the age of instant gratification. Because it's the youth especially that overconsume social media, right? It's the norm, starting in middle school, maybe even earlier, I don't know. I don't have kids myself, obviously, and I don't ask my sister, but maybe even elementary school, Lord knows. They're using social media, Facebook, TikTok, Instagram, this, that, comparing themselves with their friends, how many friends their friends have, what possessions their friends own, how beautiful they look, what clothes they own, blah, 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 blah. It goes on and on. They're making themselves crazy. And social media is designed by masterminds who've developed these incredibly sophisticated algorithms to hook us, to make us addicted. The moment we click on one video, what happens? It'll spit back to us 10 more videos of the same kind, except even more extreme, and we get sucked into what I'm calling this vortex of instant gratification. More, right? And it's very, very difficult to escape. There are 2 kinds of addiction which scientists talk about, psychologists talk about. One is the most commonly known form of it, which is called substance addiction, right? You're addicted to cigarettes, addicted to alcohol, addicted to heroin, and so on and so forth. But now, thanks to the internet, thanks especially to social media, there's an entirely new form of addiction called behavioral addiction. And it's become a massive problem throughout the world. Behavioral addiction. Addiction to certain kinds of behavior and patterns of behavior. What do I mean? One good example is addiction to social media. Addiction to pornography is a huge problem now because it's so widely available, free, so on. These were, you can say they were problems in the past, but they've become exacerbated by the internet, okay? And by this current age of instant gratification. So there's an entire field, actually, within modern psychology dedicated to answering these questions. Number one, why is it that this age of instant gratification is making us less happy than ever? And what is the recipe for true happiness? So that field within psychology is called positive psychology. Okay, it's a relatively new field within psychology. Standard psychology is about making us, quote unquote, normal. We suffer from some kind of mental illness, depression, anxiety, and it tries to cure us of that and make us normal. And positive psychology starts where traditional psychology leaves off. Okay, so even when we've achieved normality, even when we're free from mental illness, some kind of debilitating mental illness, then the next question is, how do we flourish in life? How do we achieve genuine fulfillment in life? That's the next question. So it's kind of psychology 2.0. That's what positive psychology is about. And so a lot of this talk is going to draw on some of the insights of contemporary positive psychology. And at the same time, I want to discuss how Vedanta, the insights of ancient Vedanta, the great Vedantic scriptures, Bhagavad Gita, Bhagavata Purana, Vairagya Shatakam, many others, how they can answer these same questions, in some ways in a more profound way, and in a more subtle way, in a more subtly psychological way than even the most modern positive psychologists are coming up with. So the way I see it, some of the insights of contemporary positive psychology and many of the ancient insights from Vedanta, they kind of complement each other and they strengthen each other and they also mutually illuminate each other. So as a way of framing this talk on the science of happiness, I want to focus on one book from positive psychology in particular. Some of you might have read it or at least have heard of it. It's a book by one of the founding fathers of positive psychology in the West. His name is Martin Seligman. He's a professor at the University of Pennsylvania. And he wrote a book called Authentic Happiness, published a little over 20 years ago, 2002. It's quite an interesting book and helpful book, I think. There he presents three paradigms for living. And he calls them respectively, number one, the pleasant life, number two, the good life, and number three, the meaningful life. And I think that's a useful way to kind of structure this talk. So we'll go through them one by one and bring in Vedanta as appropriate. So number one, the pleasant life. What does Seligman mean by the pleasant life? Well, it's the most obvious, it's the most intuitive way of living. It's the kind of life that's encouraged by this current age of instant gratification. Try to populate your life with as much happiness as possible in the form of instant gratification in particular. So maximize instant gratification in various forms and you will be happy. This is the formula. And what he says is, what he finds based on his scientific research is that if you do this, you're going to end up falling flat on your face. And you're never going to achieve true happiness. You'll make yourself miserable. Yeah. So one of the famous experiments that explains why this is the case was done long back, about 5 decades ago, in 1972. Some of you are probably familiar with it. The marshmallow test, yeah, exactly. By Walter Mischel at Stanford University. And he did this experiment on 4-year-olds. And the experiment's quite simple. He brings a 4-year-old into his room and he places a nice, tasty-looking marshmallow in front of them and says, here's the deal. I'm going to leave the room. You can eat this one marshmallow now, or if you can hold out for 15 minutes, when I come back after 15 minutes, I will reward you with 2 marshmallows, and you can enjoy 2, not 1, but 2 marshmallows. And the videotape is rolling, and he observes what they do. And so he leaves the room. One kid after another comes. So this first kid, they really love marshmallows, and so this kid is really trying to restrain himself from eating that marshmallow in various ways, distracting himself, twiddling his thumbs, looking around, singing a song. Do, 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 do. It's really funny, actually, the videotape. And 2 out of 3 children succumb to the temptation of eating the marshmallow before the 15-minute time period is up. They can't help themselves. 1 out of 3 are able to hold out. But the fascinating thing about the study is that it was a longitudinal study, which means that Walter Mischel revisited these kids many years later, no longer kids, right? In their, I don't know, maybe early 20s, late teens, early 20s, and looks at their life outcomes, looks at their educational attainment, looks at what kind of jobs they have, looks at their general mental health, looks at their SAT scores, their grades, and so on and so forth. And what he found, even BMI, body mass index, so how fat they are, different things, physical health. And what they found is that on many of these measures, those 1 out of 3 children, those 4-year-olds who are able to hold out, wait those 15 minutes, resist eating that marshmallow, those 1 out of 3 who are able to delay their desire for gratification, had far better life outcomes than the 2 out of 3 who succumbed to the temptation of instant gratification. Okay. Now, those of you who have some background in psychology or who know something about the marshmallow test might raise your hand and say, wait a minute, but this study has been challenged and there's been difficulty in replicating it. It's complicated. I don't want to go into the complexities. I'm also not a psychologist. But there's at least one scientist who did replicate the study. His name is Joaquim de Posada, and he did an experiment, the same kind of experiment, but with Latino kids at Columbia University on the East Coast. And he came up with very similar results, but then there are other ways that scientists have challenged the results. But in any case, other kinds of studies have come out proving the same kinds of things, okay? That delaying gratification is a recipe for much greater happiness in life and much greater fulfillment in life than a pleasant life based on just maximizing instant gratification in various forms. And if you just think about it for yourself, even apart from scientific studies, just ask yourself, each one of you, mentally, ask yourself, what events in life, what achievements in life, what aspects of your life have given you the greatest happiness? Just think about it. And the answers might range from things like raising my kids well, writing my doctoral dissertation, training for that marathon that I was able to run a few years ago. Do you see what I mean? What's the common denominator in these things? Delaying gratification. I bet very few of you will say, it was that Rashabala I ate 10 years ago. Some of you might. But in general, the things worth living for are the things that require delayed gratification, not those things that are instantly gratifying. Because one feature of instant gratification is that it's really great while it lasts, but it lasts so brief a period of time, and then it disappears. And then you all but forget about it. Except that there's this desire that lingers. That's the other problem. And that's another thing that science is finding again and again. We'll come to that in a second. Anna Lemke, again, Stanford keeps coming up. That's my rival, actually, because I was a Berkeley student. And Berkeley and Stanford are notorious rivals, but I keep quoting Stanford study. So Anna Lemke, a Stanford psychotherapist, she wrote a book called Dopamine Nation, Finding Balance in the Age of Indulgence, published 3 years ago, 2021. Dopamine Nation. This is profoundly relevant to understanding the nature of this current age of instant gratification. What is dopamine? Again, I'm not a neuroscientist, so I can't give you a very technical answer, but basically it's the craving or feel-good chemical. It's a neurotransmitter that's responsible for making us feel happy and feeling rewarded and giving us motivation to do things that make us happy. Okay. So now, what happens when we keep indulging in some form of instant gratification? What she says is, based on scientific studies, that instant gratification leads to a sudden spike in our dopamine levels, which gives us great joy. Okay, but the problem is, eventually that doesn't last, that dopamine high, and then we come crashing down, and our baseline dopamine level goes even lower, just when we're not instantly gratifying ourselves, right? And so our baseline dopamine levels go down. Then what happens? That means we crave that same high again, and yet we need more of that substance or that behavior to get that same dopamine high that we enjoyed the first time around. So we get stuck in this vicious cycle where to get the same dopamine high, we need to take more of that substance or engage in more of that behavior. But then inevitably, of course, that's not going to last, and then our baseline dopamine levels go even lower. And then we crave that instant gratification even more, and then that's a cycle of addiction. That's the nature of all addiction, actually. And it's very, very hard to escape that cycle. And as I said, in the past, it was mostly addiction took the form of substance addictions. Now, we've got substance addictions and we've got behavioral addictions. And people even who can say that I'm not addicted to cigarettes or alcohol or whatever, they can still be addicted to some form of behavior. And the age of the internet and social media makes it very difficult to avoid these behavioral addictions. Psychologists call this, another way of putting this is the hedonic treadmill. Have any of you heard of this concept of the hedonic treadmill? Yeah. So it's the idea that we get some kind of happiness through achieving something. Like, let's say, I know that if I just get this Mercedes-Benz, I'll be happy. So I spend 20 years of my life working really hard, extra hours, overtime, saving to get that Mercedes-Benz that I wanted. Then I finally am able to buy that Mercedes-Benz. Then what happens? I'm still not happy. Why? It could be because now I'm hanging out with a different kind of group of friends who are a little bit higher echelon, make a little bit more. Now, they're not impressed with the Mercedes-Benz. They've got a yacht, and now I need to earn enough to get a yacht. And then those people with a yacht, once I get the yacht, let's say, then I'm friends with Elon Musk, and he's got space rockets. So you're never satisfied. It's never enough. Once you get $1 million, you're hanging out with millionaires, and then you need to be a multimillionaire. Once you're a multimillionaire, you're hanging out with billionaires, now you need $1 billion. So that way actually lies unhappiness. That's the idea of the hedonic treadmill. What you get, the moment you get it, you get used to it. Right? You think when you don't have the Mercedes-Benz that if you just get that Mercedes-Benz, you'll be happy. Once you get it, you're like, yeah, okay, good. It's really nice for a little bit. You drive for the first few weeks, show it off to people, but then you get used to it. And then you want something more. It never lasts. That happiness never lasts. So that's the problem. Now, Lemke, what does she say? She says, since the turn of the millennium, so with the advent of this age of instant gratification, the internet and so on, behavioral as opposed to substance addictions have soared. Every spare second is an opportunity to be stimulated, whether by entering the TikTok vortex, scrolling Instagram, swiping through Tinder, or binging on porn, online gambling, and e-shopping. Online gambling, we're in Las Vegas, so online gambling, in-person gambling. I get out of the airport, it's just these people like rats. Actually, it's not even a metaphor anymore. Literally like rats. Doing this or pushing a button. Like zombies, Because there's another study done very recently by a scientist in Switzerland named Christian Luescher, Luescher. He's done these experiments on mice, really interesting experiments on instant gratification. What he does is he puts a mouse in a cage, and he puts this dopamine delivery device with a lever on the other side of the cage, and he sees what the mice will do. What will the mice do? It's kind of obvious. The mice will go to it. The moment it hits that lever once, it gets this direct dopamine buzz, this dopamine high. And so what will it do? It'll keep pushing that lever, like you see in the Las Vegas airport. Like this. Now, he does a variant on the same experiment, which is a little cruel, actually, but unfortunate. But anyway, I'll tell you anyway. Okay, so now, the mouse is on one side of the cage. That same dopamine delivery device is on the other side. But between the mouse and that device, he places an electrically charged grid. So in order for the mouse to get to that dopamine high, it has to cross over that grid. With every step it takes, it's getting electrocuted. It's given some pain, because of that electrocution. What will the mouse do? It will nonetheless brave the pain to get to the other side. What makes the experiment even more cruel is that even when it gets to that dopamine delivery device, it's still touching that grid. It can't escape the grid. It gets no relief. And yet it won't stop hitting the lever. With every touch of the lever, it's getting pain. And yet it's going to brave that pain in order to get that dopamine high. And it won't stop. This reminds me very much, any of you who have studied the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna, read the Gospel. It's like what Sri Ramakrishna says about the camel. Just for that tiny bit of juice in that cactus, it has to undergo untold suffering because it has to go through, every time it bites on that cactus tree, what happens? The cacti have needles. Its gums are bleeding. Its teeth, their mouth is full of blood. It's getting that tiny bit of joy from that tiny bit of juice, and yet it can't stop. This is Maya. And yet, this has become pervasive because of this current age of instant gratification. We're all like that to varying degrees now, unfortunately. We're all like those camels, those mice, pushing that lever again and again and again and again. Lemke says, studies have shown that the constant stream of retweets, likes, and shares from different social media sites causes the brain's reward area to trigger the same kind of chemical reaction seen with drugs like cocaine. In fact, neuroscientists have compared social media interaction to a syringe of dopamine being injected straight into the system. And she even goes so far as to call the smartphone the modern day hypodermic needle. Younger kids may not even know what the hypodermic needle is, but it's the syringe with which you inject yourself with heroin. So highly addictive drugs, substances. But that's it. And the problem is, it's with us all the time. It's with us all. So actually, one pro tip that she gives in her book, which I think is actually very helpful, and I give talks sometimes on Vedanta in the age of social media. And when kids come and they ask, well, give us some practical advice on what we can do. One really, really helpful piece of advice, which she gives in this book, is restrict your social media use only to larger devices like iPads or laptops. Don't allow yourself to use social media on your phone. Then what happens is, the thing that stays with you 24/7, you can't use that for social media. And then that automatically curtails your social media. So that's just one example. But there are many things you can do, but that's one very practical thing you can do to just reduce your addiction to social media if you have a problem. Now, so that's a lot of research on contemporary research, scientific studies done on why populating our life with as much instant gratification as possible is actually a recipe for unhappiness. Now let's come to Vedanta. What does Vedanta say about this? Chapter 18 of Bhagavad Gita. We can start from there. Bhagavan Krishna distinguishes three kinds of happiness based on the three gunas: tamas, rajas, and sattva. What are these three gunas? These are, what does guna mean? It's a very hard term to translate. Often it's translated as qualities. I prefer the term energies. Partly because energy can manifest in different ways, and I think that's exactly what gunas are all about. Gunas are these fundamental energies which manifest in human behavior in different ways. So, if I'm full of tamas, how will that manifest in my behavior? I'll oversleep. I'll be lazy. I'll procrastinate. I'll be very kind of mean-minded, typically. Jealous, complaining, depressed often. Depression also is a sign of tamas. What are some of the signs of rajas? Always wanting to do things. I want to do this, I want to do that. And if you're very rajasic and you tell that person to just sit still for 1 hour, they won't be able to. They'll freak out. Okay. Because they're hyperactive. They have to be doing something at all times. That's very rajasic. And they also tend to be a little egoistic, a little or a lot, depending on how much rajas they have. Arrogant, boastful. There are some people who, very rajasic people, they'll talk about themselves in the third person. Like Trump will sometimes talk about himself in the third, and like bragging about themselves in different ways. Sattvic people who have a lot of sattva. That sattva manifests as humility, as compassion, as a certain calmness, tranquility, equanimity. Temper. People with tempers tend to be rajasic. So anger is a characteristic of rajas, for instance. Lust, characteristic of rajas. Greed, rajas. So sattvic people just naturally just tend to be calm, humble. What did you say?
Humble.
Humble? Is that, yeah. Humble, calm. They won't lose their temper so easily. And they're good. They're just basically good people, and people naturally kind of gravitate toward them and find them and appreciate them. So now, with that in the background, how does Gita define these three kinds of happiness based on the three gunas? Let's start with the Rajasika form of happiness, because this is the Vedantic definition of instant gratification, the happiness that we get from instant gratification, and why it's a recipe for unhappiness. Vishayendriya sanyogat yat tat agrem ritopamam pariname vishamiva tat sukham rajasam sukha. Any happiness derived from the contact of the sense organs, eyes, ears, mouth, whatever, with sense objects is a Rajasika form of happiness. And what's the structure of all Rajasika forms of happiness? Which includes all forms of instant gratification. In the beginning, it's like nectar, amrita, and in the end, it becomes like poison, visham. That's the nature of all forms of instant gratification. The most fundamental reason being because it never lasts. If it lasted, that's one thing, but it's just not possible. It's not possible. We have to come down to earth again, and usually sooner rather than later. Especially, and the more intense the happiness, the more quickly it goes away, right? So now you might ask, well, why exactly? So one reason is because it doesn't last, but there are other reasons. Sri Aurobindo, in his commentary on this verse, he has a giant book called Essays on the Gita, which I'm teaching actually now as a textbook. I'm teaching a class called Bhagavad Gita and the Light of Sri Ramakrishna. If you're interested, you can follow it. It's on YouTube. Sri Aurobindo says, Rajasika forms of joy, of happiness. It's like nectar to the lips at first touch, but there's a secret poison in the bottom of the cup. And after it, the bitterness of disappointment, satiety, fatigue, revolt, disgust, sin, suffering, loss, transience. Transience is what I've already mentioned, which is that it doesn't last, but all of these other reasons too. Did I get what I was looking for from that Mercedes-Benz? To find, in the end, no, I didn't. Why? Because now I'm worried about, because it's a very expensive car, now I'm paranoid about what if somebody scratches it? I need to make it look beautiful, so I have to go to the car wash more often. Man, a million things. There's a tiny dent. I didn't care whether my little Honda Civic had a dent in it. Now I care if there's even the slightest scratch on my new Mercedes-Benz. New worries, new anxieties, this and that. There's always this problem. But Vedanta goes even deeper. So let's look at a different scripture for an even deeper answer. Why exactly is it that all forms of instant gratification are like nectar in the beginning, but ultimately will become like poison? Bhagavata Purana. Na jatu kamaha kamanam upabhogyena shamyati havisha krishnabhatmeva bhuya eva vivartati. Desire is never satisfied through enjoyment. Desire is never satisfied through enjoyment. Rather, imagine that there's a fire that you're trying to extinguish, and you come up with the brilliant idea of pouring oil into that fire. The Indian term is ghee, but I'm using the American equivalent, like in a barbecue, oil, right? What will happen? It'll blaze even higher, right? It'll become an even bigger fire. That's what happens. We think intuitively that if I have a desire, if a desire is raging in me, well, I just need to get the object of the desire, and then the fire will be extinguished. But what actually happens? The moment I get that Benz, now I want two Mercedes, or I want a yacht. The desire increases; it gets even bigger and more intense. Each one of you can verify this for yourself. I'm sure most of you have, because that's just the nature of life. We find that desires are never satisfied through enjoyment. The older you are, the wiser you become about this. And you realize that. That's why Swami Medhanandaji, I'm a Hindu chaplain at 2 universities, as Rini was. She's the one who got me involved with UCLA, actually. So I'm at USC and UCLA. And one of the things that I say again and again is a quote from Swami Medhanandaji. He says, the secret of life is not enjoyment, but education through experience. The secret of life is not enjoyment, but education through experience. One thing I really love about Vedanta is that it's not this kind of, some form of Christianity says, do this, don't do that, you'll go to hell if you do this. It's not like that. It's not about, oh, you want to do that? Vedanta will say, you want to do that? Go ahead and do it, but do it with your eyes open. Do it mindfully. And ask yourself, in the midst of the experience and even after the experience. Did I get out of this experience what I was looking for? That's what Vedanta tells you, encourages you to do. Learn from your experiences. Be educated through your experiences. Be smart. Okay. Another Vedantic scripture called Vairagya Shatakam. This is the translation of this title would be 100 verses on Vairagya. Vairagya could mean detachment, it could mean renunciation, it could mean dispassion. Okay, it's another wonderful Vedantic text. And there's another verse which is really illuminating, I think. Satu bhavati daridro yasya trishna vishala manasi cha paritushte kortavan kodaridra. This gives a very beautiful definition of true wealth and true poverty. That person is poor whose desires are great. That person is poor whose desires are great. Just think about it. If I have $1 million, but I desire $100 million, am I happy? No. I'm actually poor in heart. But that so-called poor villager in India or Africa, let's say, or Brazil, who makes $1,000 a month, let's say. That's a lot actually for a villager, but in any case, $100 a month. But whose desires are far fewer than that millionaire. That person is far richer in spirit than the millionaire. And that person is happier actually. And then this next line. Manasi cha paritushte kortavan kodaridra. When the mind is content, who is rich and who is poor? Happiness is really all about the mind. It's not about external possessions, how much money you have, or how. It's not about that. So if the mind is content, if the mind has fewer desires than the next person, that person is much happier than the person with a bunch of cars and this and that, is everything in the world from a material standpoint. And yet is full of desires, right? And the problem is, the paradox is, the more you have, the greater your desires become. So what's the thing to do? Reduce your wants. That's what Vedanta says. In the Shanti Parva and the Mahabharata, that's why it says, after giving a catalog of different kinds of happiness, the maximal happiness you can get on earth. And then it says, but what about the happiness of heaven? Maybe that's a more desirable form of happiness. Even that, heavenly happinesses. Take all those happinesses. That's not 1/16 of the happiness you get from Trishna Kshaya Sukham. Trishna Kshaya Sukham. This is the happiness derived from reducing your wants, reducing your desires. Ask yourself, what do I really need? What do I really need at the end of the day? It doesn't mean everybody has to become a monk, but it's like that book that Jay Shetty, he wrote, Think Like a Monk, which then it became controversial because I think he turned out to be a fraud in some way. I don't know. I don't know. Put anything down. But in any case, the idea is interesting. Even if we're not a monk, we should try to think like a monk. As a householder, what does it mean? It means exactly this. Reduce your wants. Do an inventory of your day-to-day life and ask yourself, do I really need this or not? And what are my addictions, both substance addictions and behavioral addictions? How can I prevent myself from getting hooked to these things, right? So this is a very individualized kind of a thing. There's no one-size-fits-all thing. But you have to ask yourself this. Where do I get caught? Where do I get trapped? Okay. Now, by contrast, Gita defines sattvika happiness, which is a recipe for true happiness. We're still stuck in Seligman's first phase. There's these three kinds of life, right? Pleasant life, good life, and meaningful life. We're still stuck in the pleasant life because so much research has been done on this, both from the Vedantic side and the positive psychology. But we'll get to it, don't worry. Okay, so Gita defines sattvika happiness as follows. Yat tad agre vishameva pariname nirtopamam tat sukham sattvikam proktam atma buddhi prasadajam. Sattvika forms of happiness have exactly the opposite structure that Rajasika happiness has. In the beginning, it's like poison. And in the end, it's like nectar. Delayed gratification. You see, training for a marathon, not easy. Raising your kids, not easy. Writing a doctoral dissertation, not easy. Is it painful at times? Definitely. Is it rewarding in the end? Yes. right? Delayed gratification. And what the Gita says, the last phrase is very profound. Atma buddhi prasadajam. All sattvika forms of joy, sattvika forms of fulfillment, are Atma buddhi prasadajam. They are born of the satisfaction, the prasada, of Atma and buddhi. Buddhi is the higher intellect. The intellect that likes to think of higher things, spiritual things, and higher ideas and concepts, not the ordinary things of the world. And Atma here means the soul, the deeper, eternal soul within us, which is a spark of the divine, a child of God. Which means what? That there is a qualitative difference between instant gratification, which is rajasic, and sattvika happiness, delayed gratification, on the other hand, which is sattvic. There's a qualitative, it's not a difference in quantity, it's a difference in kind. And Vedanta gives you a very deep answer as to why there's a qualitative difference. There's a qualitative difference because rajasic forms of happiness gratify either the body or the mind or both, the body-mind complex. Whereas sattvika forms of joy, sattvika forms of fulfillment, gratify the deeper soul within. That's why it has a different kind of quality to it, right? And that's why if we can populate our lives with more and more forms of sattvika joy, sattvika fulfillment, delayed gratification, we'll be far happier than those who are constantly trying to populate their lives with different forms of instant gratification. And you'll see this. I'm sure many of you know people like this, whose recipe for happiness is instant gratification, and I can guarantee you'll know this. They're not very happy. But those who put effort behind trying to get true fulfillment, they lead much happier lives. What are some examples of delayed gratification? I've already given you some. Many of you are parents, you know that, right? The delayed gratification in raising your kids and seeing them shine and so on. But there are many more. And in fact, we can make every aspect of our lives sattvic. And the first step, though, in spiritual life is what I call brutally honest self-assessment. You have to be really honest with yourself. And you can use this three gunas paradigm to kind of figure out, identify, what are my strengths, what are my weaknesses? Ask yourself if you're married, or if you have a significant other, a partner of some sort. What is my relationship with my significant other like? Is it tamasic? Is it rajasic? Is it sattvic? What is a tamasic relationship in that case? You neglect your partner. You don't really think about, you care only about yourself. You're a little bit selfish, and you're just letting the relationship coast in a certain way. And when your partner is in need, really needs a shoulder to lean on, you're not there. Tamasic. Rajasic. Rajasic, being in a very rajasic relationship with your significant other, high drama. It's what psychologists call emotional codependence. Unhealthy codependence. It's lots of emotional highs and lows, a lot of drama, a lot of crying, anger, temper tantrums. Rajasic. Sattvic is you support each other, you love each other, and yet there's a space between you. C.S. Lewis wrote a book called Four Loves, and where he talks about the love of friendship as a love where you're walking side by side. Whereas he says erotic love is one where you're face to face, and where you feel almost suffocated. So that face to face kind of relationship is rajasic. Side by side, if you can be side by side with your significant other, that's more sattvic. That's why Sri Ramakrishna would tell even householders. He would say, it's fine that you marry, no problem. But after having one or two children, try to live with your spouse like brother and sister. That's living side by side. That's walking side by side. That's a more sattvic kind of relationship with your significant other. Now, think about raising your children. What's a tamasic way of raising your children? Neglecting them. Right? And there are many parents who do that. Selfish parents who neglect their kids. Rajasic parents is what's called helicopter parenting. Mm-hmm. You hover over your children and you try to shape them, mold them in your own image. I'm an engineer, so you have to be an engineer. I'm a doctor, so you have to be a doctor. I value these things, therefore you have to value these things. That's Rajasic parenting. Not good. Indian parents. Not everybody's like that, but many are. Sattvic parenting. Sattvic parenting. You look at your kid as a soul. You look at yourself as a soul, you look at your kid as a soul. This soul has its own lessons to learn. It has its own journey, its own spiritual journey. God has entrusted you with the responsibility of facilitating your child's spiritual journey. Help that soul discover its own path. That's sattvic parenting. Let your child grow in his or her own way, instead of hovering over the kid and trying to mold your kid in your own image. Right? That's sattvic parenting. So you can do this in any domain. What kind of movies do you watch? Are they tamasic? Do they put you to sleep? Are they rajasic, full of sex and violence? Are they sattvic, art films which make you think and make you think about higher spiritual things? Music, what kind of music do you listen to? Is it tamasic, rajasic, sattvic? Same thing. You can do an inventory of every single thing. So spiritual life is not just confined to the meditation room. Try to make every aspect of your life, every moment of your life as sattvic as possible. And then your whole life will become spiritualized. And you'll be happier as a result. Okay, so I think that's a lot. Oh, one thing before I move on to the other two kinds of life. We're still in pleasant life. Another form of sattvic joy, which I love. Physical exercise. We just went on a wonderful hike this morning. Very sattvic. You might think, how is that sattvic? It's rajasic. You're moving and you're sweating and you go to a gym, people tend to be very egoistic and this and that. It's all about attitude, actually. So you can do the same kind of physical exercise in a rajasic way or in a sattvic way. If you're doing it in order to look good and to attract your mate and this and that, and you're always looking in the mirror in the gym and all that, that's more rajasic, right? But if you're doing it in order to keep this temple of God, your body, healthy and well, and you can even spiritualize the activity. How do you do that, the physical activity? By repeating a mantra, for instance, if you've been initiated, if you have a spiritual mantra, repeat it mentally. Synchronize it with the breath. Synchronize it with your pace if you're jogging. If you're swimming, synchronize it with the stroke. And then that becomes a spiritual practice in its own right. It's wonderful. And there's been study after study showing that physical exercise, regular physical exercise, is more effective at alleviating mental health issues like depression and anxiety than even prescription medicines. So psychiatrists themselves, when patients come to them now, if they've done the latest research, before they prescribe medicine, that doesn't mean that prescription medicine is not necessary in some cases, but in mild to moderate cases of mental health issues, often the first line treatment that psychiatrists and psychologists suggest is regular physical exercise. Regular physical exercise. So that's another form of a sattvic kind of happiness. Because anyone who knows, who has started an exercise regimen will know that in the beginning it's not very pleasant. So that's that poison that Gita talks about in the beginning. Getting up in the morning, and, oh, do I really have to go to the gym or get us to go outside? But once you get a taste for it, what happens? It becomes addictive. It becomes addictive, but this is a healthy addiction, like the addiction to japa, the addiction to prayer, the addiction to spiritual music, like this beautiful songs that you sung. You see what I mean? There's addiction and there's addiction. So Sri Ramakrishna would say, when people would keep visiting him, he would say, you're like that peacock who's addicted to opium. So he has opium once at 4 p.m. So that means he's going to come back to the same spot at 4 p.m. every day to get that opium high again. But these are spiritual things, and these are higher things that keep the body healthy and the mind healthy and the spirit healthy, right? Okay, so now, finally, I want to get to the two other kinds of life, because Seligman has proved definitively, and there's this whole body of scientific research proving that the pleasant life is a recipe for unhappiness. Okay, and Vedanta has proved the same thing. The second kind of life is what he calls the good life. And Seligman says some really interesting things about the good life. He says, the good life is one in which you do two things, and it has two basic steps. Number one, identify your signature strengths. Identify your signature strengths. Number 2, find a vocation or a calling that helps you to cultivate those signature strengths regularly on a daily basis. That's it. That's the recipe for the good life. And he says, you will be far happier if you can do that. Okay. What's the idea? The idea is that it involves necessarily, automatically, delayed gratification. You figure out what your strengths are, whatever it is. Maybe my strength is in medicine. So what does that mean? My calling might be to be a doctor or a nurse, right? There's this whole research done on flow after this famous book done by Csikszentmihalyi on flow. And what he explains is, when you do something that is challenging, but not too challenging, that means that your strengths are up to the challenge, right? That's a recipe for entering into a flow state in which you sometimes can even, in this like very heightened state of flow, you forget time altogether. And you're just fully immersed in that experience. And you experience this true joy. But it's not easy. If it's too easy, you'll be bored. If it's too hard, you'll be frustrated. So there's this kind of sweet spot where it's challenging and yet your strengths are up to the challenge. And then you can enter that flow state. But that typically involves a kind of delayed gratification. That's the idea. So it's a sattvika form of happiness. Now, where does Vedanta come in? First of all, the Bhagavad Gita said the same thing millennia before Martin Seligman did. Right? Because in the Gita, we find this concept of what's called swadharma. Swadharma. Your own law of being. Bhagavan Krishna says, the first step in spiritual life is discover your swadharma. What is your own law of being? That's what Seligman means by signature strengths. Because Krishna himself defines swadharma in terms of 2 terms, guna and karma. Guna, karma. Guna means your innate quality. Your innate qualities. Karma, your behavior. Both those things. It's possible that you have certain innate qualities, but which are not manifested because you're not making the most of your potential. That's also possible. So you have to look at both these things. What are your innate strengths and weaknesses? And what's your behavior like? And you can discover your own law of being based on these 2 things. Okay? So that corresponds to Seligman's number 1. Number 2, Gita says, Swabhava niyatam karma kurvan napnoti kilvisham. If you find a calling, a line of work that helps you to cultivate your swadharma, your own law of being, that is in line with your swabhava, your inner nature, what will happen? You will make the most rapid spiritual progress. And you will ultimately realize the highest goal of life, which is liberation. That's the beauty of it. We'll purify our minds and attain the highest goal of life. But Vedanta adds something to positive psychology, which is missing. Okay? For Seligman, the recipe for the good life is just these 2 steps. Number 1, identify your signature strengths. Number 2, find a calling that helps you to cultivate the signature strengths. Vedanta will add a 3rd crucial step. Vedanta says, Martin, you're missing a 3rd step. And you won't be truly happy without this 3rd step. Engage in that work, that calling that helps you to cultivate your signature strengths in a nishkama spirit. You have to check the attitude with which you're engaging in that work. That's what's missing from contemporary positive psychology. Karma nyevadikaraste ma phaleshu gadachana, chapter 2 of the Gita. You have the right to the work. It's wonderful that you've discovered your law of being, you know what your strengths are, you found your calling. But are you doing it egoistically? Are you hankering after the results? Or are you doing it as a spiritual practice, selflessly, by taking the ego out of the work, doing it as an offering to the divine, for instance? That's why yesterday in the Q&A, I quoted from chapter 3 of the Gita. The right way to engage in any kind of activity is to do it as an offering to the divine. Mayi sarvani karmani sanyasya adhyatma chetasa. And then you'll be free from the fever of egoism and selfishness. Because no matter how talented you are at something, and even if you've discovered your calling, and if you do it in a selfish, egoistic way, if you care too much about name and fame and recognition, you will still be unhappy. So that crucial 3rd step is missing from positive psychology. That's what Vedanta teaches us. So we can learn so much even now from these great Vedantic scriptures. And finally, the meaningful life. Seligman calls this third kind of life the meaningful life. He says, even if we've realized the problems with the pleasant life, and we've decided, no, a life based on maximizing instant gratification is not a life worth living. I'm going to live the good life. Even if we do that, live a good life, live the good life, following these two steps. And even if I'm a Vedantan and I add the third step, which is purify my attitude and try to take the ego out of my work, try to do nishkama karma, right? Work desirelessly and unselfishly. Even then, there's something missing, Seligman says. He calls this third paradigm the meaningful life. So the good life needs to be supplemented with and enhanced by a meaningful life, which means you need an overarching purpose in your life, even beyond just what your calling is. So what is your overarching purpose? It needs to be something bigger than yourself. So Seligman says it could very well be God, some kind of religion, some spiritual aim. It could be nirvana. It could also, because he's an atheist himself actually, so he's very broad in the way that he defines the meaningful life. And he says it could also be some form of activism. It could be something you're very passionate about, like Greta Thunberg, this young woman who's an environmental activist. Environmental activism, social activism, Black Lives Matter, this, that could also be. That can give your life meaning in a way that even the good life by itself can't. Okay. Here Vedanta will say, not so fast. Unless the thing that gives your life meaning is transcendental, truly transcendental, it is a recipe for unhappiness too. So something like environmental activism. It's a wonderful thing. I'm not saying not to be environmental, but that can't give you the overarching spiritual meaning to your life. Why? Because Swami Vivekananda, he puts it very simply. He says, the world is like a dog's curly tail. Every time you straighten it out, what happens? It curls back up. That's the problem. No one in the history of this world has ever made this world perfect. Nobody can make this world perfect. There will always be something to be activistic about and to complain about. And we should try to make the world a better place, absolutely. But we can never make it perfect. So that means we have to make ourselves perfect instead. That's what spiritual practice is all about. We have to look within and try to perfect ourselves. And so that overarching purpose in life that really gives our life meaning has to be something transcendental, says Vedanta. Doesn't mean it has to be God necessarily. If you're a bhakta, if you're devotionally oriented, God will give your life meaning. That's why I had a friend who was an alcoholic and then he joined AA, and he said one phrase that people in AA use is that we realize that we had a God-shaped hole in our lives, a God-shaped hole. That's what's missing. God is missing, right? For other people, God doesn't resonate with them. They just can't bring themselves to believe in a God. But they can still be very, very deeply spiritual. So they might take to things like Buddhist mindfulness, yoga, Advaita Vedanta. Even Advaita, in its highest reaches, is not theistic. It doesn't believe in the personal God. It believes only in the higher self, right? So that also will give your life meaning in a transcendental sense. So it doesn't have to be God, but that's a common form that it takes. But something beyond the reach of the senses, something transcendental, okay? So, science of happiness. What is a Vedantic science of happiness that I think is corroborated by contemporary science, contemporary positive psychology, contemporary neuroscience? Number one, the recipe for unhappiness is a life based on maximizing instant gratification. That's why we have to be very careful, especially as parents, with your children, how best to raise your kids. And now you're going to be paranoid. I don't want to be a Rajasic parent or a Tamasic parent. How do I be a sattvic parent? It's difficult. It's very, very difficult, challenging. I can only imagine because I don't have kids myself. But because if you just say you're not allowed to do this or that, that's also kind of a little bit too aggressive. You have to bend sometimes, and it's tricky. I mean, that's the kind of, you have to play it by ear and figure that out. Know your kid's own psychology. So that's difficult. But balance is really important. So telling them you're not allowed to do X, Y, or Z, probably, but you can regulate their use of it in different ways. No smartphones at the dining table. You know, a few years ago, I went to Japan and I went to a restaurant, and next to me was this table, this young Japanese mother with two little kids. The whole dinner, the kids are just on their smartphones. She barely spoke a word to them. It's just so sad. So if you even institute a rule like this, just know when we're eating a meal, I don't want to see your phones. You check them at the, check them at the table. Something like that. Or you can't use social media on your phones or something like that. You see what I mean? So think about different ways of kind of, even with your kids, reducing the amount of instant gratification. Number 2, the good life. The Vedantic formula for the good life. Number 1, identify your swadharma, your signature strengths. Number 2, find your calling in life that helps you to cultivate those signature strengths. Even if that may not be what your parents want or what society values, depending on, one of the things in India especially, which I find very disturbing even now, because I lived there for 13 years before coming back here about 2 years ago. I was working at a university. And it's very sad to me that the best and brightest students go into science subjects in general, even now. There's a 10th grade exam, Madhyamik. If you do really well, go into science. If you do bad, if you fail, arts. The dreaded arts, ARTS. That's the Indian term for humanities. And it's just sad because what happens? It's a vicious cycle. Those bad students become the next generation's humanities teachers, and then what's going to come of that? Anything good will come of that? Probably not, right? And there's some wonderful humanities students too, but they're the exception, and they have to buck the trend. I know some brilliant humanities students, but they have to defy society. They have to flout societal, cultural, Indian cultural norms and say, I don't care that you value science, and that even people who do very well in their exam, they choose to go into art subjects because that's their calling, that's their passion. And then they end up being much happier in life and they make a greater contribution to society. Where would Bengal be without Tagore, the beautiful songs you sung, right? If everybody's just a scientist and engineer. You see.
But there are no jobs.
That's always a complaint and this and that. Yeah. You have to take risks in life. That's another thing. The cushy life is an easier life. So, anyway, the good life. Find your swadharma, even if that's not what society values, what your parents value, what your friends value, but find your own true calling in life. Pursue that with the passion, and yet try to take the ego out of it. That's that third step that Vedanta adds that's missing from positive psychology. And finally, have an overarching transcendental purpose to your life in the form of something, some high spiritual aim. It could be God realization, but it could also be self-realization. It could also be nirvana. Thank you.
So, do we want to do questions and answers now?
Of course.
Yeah, absolutely. I know there's a few out there that are excited about this section, so please, you can start.
And try to populate your life with sattvika forms of happiness. That's the other key to true happiness. Different forms of delayed gratification. You can think about that. What does that mean for you? I've convinced all of you. Now you all know. Go out there and be happy. Don't worry, be happy.
Okay.
It's just a matter of being able to put it in practice
Yeah, it's always the hard part, right?
consistently.
Yeah.
And doing it day in and day out, finding ways to make it happen. So what I do is I find little small habits and I start doing them until I think kind of like what you said, like waking up early in the morning or whatever, and eventually it becomes nectar. It's poison
That's right.
first.
Yeah. It's really hard in the beginning, but then
Exactly.
it gets easier, right?
Yeah.
And in fact, I was during the pandemic, I was sitting in Mysore and I wanted to educate myself about some things I didn't know much about. So I did these online courses. One of them was Introduction to Classical Music through Yale University. And there's another one, Introduction to Positive Psychology by Laurie Santos. She's a young professor at Yale University. And she published an article and she came up with this term, which I find really interesting, called the G.I. Joe effect. Any of you, have any of you watched G.I. Joe, the cartoon? From the 80s. Now you know it. Huh?
That's a long
It's a long time ago. But the slogan in the beginning, I think, of every episode of G.I. Joe, or I think it might be at the end where they give the moral of the story. Knowing is half the battle. Knowing is half the battle. Like gaining knowledge of what you should do and what you shouldn't do is half the battle. And then the other half is actually doing it, as you said. What she says, Laurie, is actually, she goes further. She says, knowing is not half the battle. It's less than half the battle, because even if you know, often you still can't do what's right. She says, I'm a professional positive psychologist. I know better than most people in the world what will make me truly happy, and yet I don't do that. Arjuna says the same thing. He complains to Krishna in chapter 3. Atakyena prayuktoyam papam charati purusha anicchana vivashnya baladavi niyojita. I know what I ought to do. I know that this is sinful, and yet what is it in me that makes me do that very thing that I don't want to do? What is it? As if by force. Literally as if I'm compelled to do it. And so this is the G.I. Joe effect. We think that knowing is half the battle, but in fact it's less than half the battle. And just knowing it is not. In Bangla in Bengali there's a beautiful term for this. You know the term? Ganpapi. It's the perfect term for this. I use it, I milk this term for myself, for others. Ganpapi, Gyana Papi. It's a combination of two words in Sanskrit. Gyana means you know, knowledge, you have the knowledge. And yet, Papi, you commit the sin anyway. You do the opposite of what your knowledge tells you. It's very difficult. And in Greek philosophy, it's called akrasia. You know what you ought to do, but because of weakness of will, you're not able to do it. You're not able to follow through on what you know you ought to do. This is the problem, right? But even if knowing is not even half the battle, it's a major part of the battle. And without knowledge, you'll never be steered in the right direction. So you need the knowledge, and then you also need to strengthen your will. You need to strengthen the will through spiritual practice. And that's why devotional practices are very helpful. Prayer, because if you have a weak will, you can call on God. You can call on a higher power. That's why one of the first steps in AA is surrender to a higher power in Alcoholics Anonymous. I can't do this on my own. I can't overcome this addiction on my own. I need to depend on somebody, surrender to someone beyond myself, greater than me. You have to step out of your own ego, right? Yeah, thank you so much. That was a great point. Anyone else?
I think also recognition, acknowledgement that what we're doing is wrong and it's not what we want to do is required.
Oh, yeah.
You know, knowing the right thing, but
Yeah.
also recognizing
Right.
it's not
That's that, well, I would say honesty with yourself. You know?
yeah.
Yeah. Honestly acknowledging like what I'm doing is actually
And
not
then
what I should be doing.
asking for help. For the right
Yeah, because what the
mindset.
ego does again, like constantly, is self-justification.
Justifies.
It rationalizes constantly. And we'll give some kind of very cogent sounding rational explanation for what we're doing. But all along, it's an unconscious drive or desire in us, which is corrupting our mind actually. And in our heart of hearts, we kind of know that we shouldn't be doing it. And yet the conscious mind is kind of deceiving ourselves.
You know, one thing I notice in myself is when I'm not like that force driving me to do the other thing, it's actually minds are connected, so it's not just me. There's thousands of other people who are saying no, and they're within one mind. So in meditation, surrendering all of them as well.
Oh, that's interesting. Like kind of trying to harness the strength of others in a way. Is that what you mean?
Well, I'm saying that we seem to think of ourselves as alone individuals, but we're not. Each
We're in a
one
society,
of us contains
multitudes.
multitudes. And so I know when I started on the path many decades ago, like everybody in my family across the world, not practicing anything, changed.
I see.
You see,
what you do has an effect on
one.
We're all in a very complex web, actually, kind of network. Yeah.
So some of the times the resistance is not even us; it's those other ones who are not on the same boat. So we need to pull them into that light, recognize
No, that's true.
that light, they need to enter that light with us. And then their forces change,
Right.
and then we all change together.
No, that's nice. That's a nice point. Yeah. I guess on the other hand, we should be careful also, us spiritual aspirants, of developing spiritual ego. It's also very dangerous.
But it's not that. It's just that mind. There's one mind.
No, I'm not saying that you have it. I'm just saying that it's a danger that we need to be very careful about. One way that it manifests is parents in this tradition I've seen this time and again, devotee parents. And they come to me and they say, Maharaj, how do I get my kids to be more interested in Vedanta? And they're, we drag them to the center, but they're not really, it doesn't come from them and this and that. I understand. I can sympathize with that. At the same time, honestly, listen to mark my words here. Kids are far more impressed by the parents' actions, by their behavior, than by their words. And if you are, forcing them to sit there and read the gospel and this and that, and the moment that you get in a quarrel with your wife, you lose your temper, they're going to lose respect for you. You say, this is the result of all your Vedanta and your spirit and your spirituality. You call yourself spiritual and then your face turns red and you start shouting. You see, live the life and your kids will be inspired. Far more than by any number of words and by, you see. And then what they'll see is, if you lead a good life, wait, what? And they compare their parents with their friends' parents who are on the brink of divorce and always shouting at each other. What is it? Oh, maybe it's because they sit for meditation every morning. Maybe there's something to the Vedanta Society. And then they're going to want to come to it on their own without you having to say anything. Live the life and they'll be inspired. That's what I would suggest.
Here's a question online here, Maharaj. Maharaj, do you see that genuine spiritual seekers focus all their efforts on transforming themselves internally while practicing total acceptance of external circumstances and other people?
That's one way. I don't think it's necessarily the only or best way for everybody, because total acceptance of everything means you're just going to affirm the status quo. And the status quo, as we all know, is not hunky-dory. There are a lot of things wrong with what's happening in various parts of the world. Terrible things are happening on a daily basis, and there's no point in mentioning it. You open any newspaper and you'll know. Right? And to just be complacent about it and say, like, everything is great as it is because everything is God, that's a very high spiritual realization. But until you're there, you better do your best. If you are in a position to help somebody or serve somebody in some way who's suffering, who's in difficulty, you ought to. You should. It's your obligation. And it'll benefit you spiritually by doing that. If there's somebody in need and you can serve that person, you ought to serve that person. And if you can improve society in some way and you're in a position to help, you should try to. But do it in a spiritual way. As I said, it's all about the attitude. And there's an egoistic attitude, right? You can donate $1 million, you can do it anonymously, or you can do it and expect that your name be emblazoned in gold letters on the front of the building that you helped to build, right? One is very Rajasic. The other, Sattvic. That's also mentioned in the Gita. Different ways of engaging in charity. Do I have that even, sometimes it takes a very subtle form. Do I have some subtle desire for name and fame? It may not be so overt, but is it there nonetheless? So that's why brutally honest self-assessment is so important. Yeah. Yes.
So, kind of piece this together here. So in this era where you had mentioned yesterday that we're heavily in body consciousness,
Yes.
and then today you're mentioning all these addictions that are basically body consciousness on steroids.
Yeah.
It's very difficult to keep away from all these. How does one balance between the desire to engage in the world in a proper way, but now with all this on the other side, is there an override feature with that directive that says, hang on, you're actually, by attempting to do that in this environment, you're actually causing more harm to yourself and others, as opposed to perhaps cultivating one of the prerequisites for life is dispassion towards the world. There seems to be some kind of contradiction here, or at least in this period with this amount of potential addictions and problems. Is there an override feature that says, hang on, in this environment, maybe just cut ties with that and focus on the dispassion prerequisite of that higher goal of everybody?
Yeah, the override feature, I think it's our own conscience, for instance, and it's our higher self. It's God within us as Antaryami. Antaryami means inner controller. That soul within us, that secretly guiding us, sometimes not so secretly, right? That's always there. It might be buried, But that's the purpose of sadhu sangha, satsanga, coming to these kinds of talks and coming to centers and engaging in spiritual practice, engaging in prayer, devotional practices, all of that, japa, meditation. All of that is meant to strengthen the override feature, right? So that the higher self can control the lower self. That's Gita chapter 6 talks about that. Don't let the lower self control you, let the higher self control the lower self. That's also what the Kathopanishad talks about, with the beautiful metaphor of a chariot. The body is the chariot. Atmanam ratinam vidhi. And the soul, the individual soul, is the rider, the king in the chariot that's being driven around. And the charioteer is the buddhi, the higher intellect, right? So the rider of the chariot, the king, he's the one, or she, the queen, is directing the buddhi. And what's the mind? The reins of the horses. At that time, they're horses, right? The horses are the sense organs. The roads, sense objects. The mind, the reins. The charioteer, buddhi. The soul is the king, right? The rider in the chariot. So that king is saying, hey, don't go here, don't go there, right? That's the right use of our... So the idea is that we should be in control of the body and mind. We should be the ones in charge. People will think you're crazy if you say, I am my Honda. Nobody says, I am my Honda Accord. You say, I use my Honda to drive to the Las Vegas Center. It's my instrument. It's my vehicle. Exactly in that way. We're actually crazy if we think that we are the body. We are the mind. Body and mind are our instruments. We're the soul. We're the deeper soul using the body-mind complex to achieve the soul's purposes. So if you have that idea, if you can constantly try to identify with the deeper soul rather than with the body-mind complex, then that override feature gets strengthened more and more. And then, even in the face of temptation, we can check ourselves, right? That's what Vedanta says, and that's why I think, forget about Advaita Vedanta, which is a very, very high-level practice, Jnana Yoga. Ramanuja teaches a much more practical kind of Jnana Yoga. Ramanuja. I don't know if we talked about this yesterday. Yeah, we did, right? Yeah. And that is, don't say the world is a dream, it's unreal. Don't say I don't believe in God, none of that. But constantly tell yourself, I am the eternal soul, a spark of the divine fire, separate from the body-mind complex. And you can do this and combine it with bhakti yoga. You can still do your prayer and come to arati and pray, all these things, japa and meditation. You can do karma yoga. Everything you do it as an offering to the divine. And yet at the same time, another very important practice is this bhakti-oriented jnana yoga, where you're telling yourself that I am a soul separate from the body-mind complex, using the body and mind as my instruments. Another problem with the classical Advaitic form of jnana yoga is that it doesn't let you do that. Because the non-dual self is completely transcendental. It's strictly aloof. It's a witness, an only witness. It doesn't use body-mind as instruments. The body-mind is unreal. It's part of this dream. Atman alone is real, right? Whereas this Ramanuja's Jnana Yoga is far more, and this I think is actually truer to the original Vedantic scriptures, the Upanishads, the Bhagavad Gita, which talk about body and mind as the instruments of the soul. The soul can actually control the body and the mind. Whereas the non-dual self of Advaita Vedanta can't, because it's strictly transcendental. So it's far more practical for the vast majority of spiritual aspirants to practice Ramanuja's Jnana Yoga, which is also Sri Ramakrishna's Jnana Yoga. I talked about that yesterday, the 6 chakras and all that. The heart level. Realize that you are the Jivatma, the individual soul, separate from the body-mind complex. You can even meditate on your individual soul in the shape of a flame. That's Sri Ramakrishna's exact language. Shikadne. That corresponds almost exactly to a beautiful mantra from the Kathopanishad. Angushta matra purushantaratma sadajananam hriday sannivishta. In our hearts, in the hearts of every single person dwells the Jivatma, the individual soul, which is Angushta matra. It's like the shape, the size of a thumb. It's like this. And you should try with great difficulty to separate this soul from the body and from the body-mind complex. Tam vidyat chukramamritam, tam vidyat chukramamritam. Know that soul to be bright and immortal. and pure. Know that soul to be bright, immortal, and pure. So that any of us can practice without all those, the fancy sadhana, chatushtaya, the fourfold sadhana and all of that. Right now, each one of us can practice that. Because we don't have to stop practicing bhakti. That's another problem with the classical Advaita paradigm. If you're practicing with passive knowledge, Shankara says, that means you're a superior aspirant. Don't practice bhakti and karma. But Ramanuja's Jnana Yoga, Sri Ramakrishna's Jnana Yoga can and should be practiced with karma yoga, with bhakti yoga, all together. Does that make sense?
Kind of, yes, but I guess one quick follow-up.
Yeah.
I guess the issue that I'm having here is is prematurely attempting this without
Attempting what?
So without cultivating the dispassion, prematurely attempting to engage with the world, or be exposed to the various addictions and
I see.
all that.
Okay.
And all that. Like a good example today would be a philanthropy, a noble cause, but very easily susceptible to fame.
Yeah.
And to notoriety and all
Yeah,
that.
right.
Right. So it's a good example now, and so before one engages in such an activity, and especially noticing the environment where it can be easily tainted, won't that taint the bhakti that you're attempting, or this
Right.
yan bhakti
Yeah.
activity that you're
I see. That's what you're getting at, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, look, but the thing, I mean, then that means everybody should be a monk, right? Don't get into society, but no, it's not quite that. Look, if we don't learn the easy way, we learn the hard way. Through experience. That's what Swami Medhanandaji meant when he said education through experience. If you put your hand on the stove, your hand will get burned. Sometimes we need to let our hand get burned a few times before we learn from, oh, okay, I'm not going to put my hand in the fire again. That's the, Raja Maharaj, Brahmananda, the first president of the Ramakrishna Mission, he would say this. He said, there are three levels of, three kinds of people. Ordinary worldly people, lowest rung. He says, they're people who, they undergo the same worldly experience again and again, have the same suffering. And yet, stupid fools, they don't learn from that experience. And so they're doomed to repeat that experience like idiots. The middle rung, he says, are people who, they undergo this worldly experience a few times, once, twice, a handful of times. Eventually they learn from the experience. And then they say, I better not do that again. They learn eventually, education through experience. Highest rung, he says, people who are so spiritually and ethically evolved that they, before they even undergo any experience, that's kind of like what you're thinking of. They say, I don't even want to set foot in that. I know it's not good for me. How do I know? Because I see what my friend got himself into by doing that. I watch the news every day and I know it. I did things in my past lives and I know that. So I don't need to myself. There's a running joke in our order, which is that we're monks in this life because we married in our past life. So that's the idea, right? So what's the idea here? The secret of life is not enjoyment, but education through experience. That means, see, it's not helpful to tell most people, don't enter society or don't, expose yourself to these temptations, because it's not practical for most people. And it's just too difficult to restrain themselves in that way. What you should do is be supportive as a friend or as a mentor or as a parent or whatever, and say, go into this experience with your eyes open. Try to be mindful in the midst of the experience. And as I said, ask yourself whether you got out of the experience what you were looking for. Try to learn from every experience that you undergo. I think that's the more practical attitude. If you feel that it's better for you look, if you're an alcoholic, okay, and you're struggling with that, obviously don't walk into a bar. That's the dumbest thing you could possibly do. That any AA meeting, anybody will tell you that. Any AA mentor will tell you that. So yes, and Sri Ramakrishna will say, if you go into a place which is full of soot, no matter how clever you are, your clothes will get stained a little bit, right? But at the same time, you can't be, it's not a one-size-fits-all thing. You have to understand yourself. If you're raising kids, you have to understand them and do what's best for them. Anna Lemke, that same Stanford psychotherapist in that book, Dopamine Nation, she has another concept which she calls self-binding strategies. It's I think, an English translation of the word tapasya in Sanskrit. But she's prescribing it. It's like, think like a monk. It's like everybody should be engaging in some form of austerity now. We have to. we have to limit ourselves, restrict ourselves in certain ways. So one example that she gives is restrict social media use to larger devices rather than your smartphone. But there are many other ways. And so you have to decide for yourself, what self-binding strategies do I need to make my life more fulfilling? And to just avoid getting sucked into this vortex of whatever it is that I'm addicted to or whatever it is that's most tempting or degrading to me. You know what I mean? And it's possible that it requires cold turkey in a way, going cold turkey and just saying like, I'm just not going to expose myself to that influence because it's just too tempting.
But or by association, where maybe you're not, but the people that you're
Of course.
engaging with, they
Yeah.
are, and it transmits that.
Yeah, bad company. It's the opposite of satsanga. Satsanga. Yeah, avoid people because it brings the mind down. If they're constantly talking about these things or behaving in a certain way, no matter how strong you are, that'll pull you down. Better not to hang out so much with those kinds of people. You can support them from a distance. Maybe talk to them on the phone, unless they talk your ear off too much. But yeah. Other questions or comments? I feel like you're
I'm thinking.
something's on the tip of your tongue.
So I was saying that, so you said that karma will devote to God, like, okay, I'm
Yes.
doing it,
Whatever
karma.
you do it as an offering.
What about bad karma? Then that also I offer?
Interesting question. Yes. This reminds me of an interesting incident in Sri Ramakrishna's life. Girish Ghosh, famous debauch, alcoholic. He himself bragged later. He said, I've committed every sin under the sun. He said, if I had known that I would be able to take refuge at the feet of Sri Ramakrishna, I would have committed many more sins. So, this incident, Girish comes to him with this terrible problem, this alcoholism. He's tormenting his wife for years. It's awful. I mean, the abusive alcoholic husband. And he comes to Sri Ramakrishna, great sadness, and says, how can I get over this? What can I do? I know it's, again, Papi, I know what I should do. I know I shouldn't be drinking again. I can't help myself. Sri Ramakrishna gives a very interesting piece of advice. He says, okay, next time you're tempted to drink, before you drink that bottle, offer it to Divine Mother.
Oh,
Yes. Is it a good thing that he's about to do? No.
no,
But what happens when he does that? He follows his advice.
cannot.
No, a few times he does,
Oh.
but it makes him feel guilty ultimately. He's like, is this something that I can really be again and again offering to Divine Mother? I should be offering good things. You know, when you do a puja, do you offer the worst things to God, or do you offer the best fruits? You go to Whole Foods, and even though it costs an arm and a leg, you get the best foods for Thakur, right? Same way, you don't want to offer bad things, but it might take some time. It doesn't happen overnight. Eventually, though, you'll start, that conscience will prick you. And that's what happened. He overcame his alcoholism. Not just that, he became a great saint. He became a great saint. Kalipada Ghosh, another example of somebody who was transformed spiritually by the touch of Sri Ramakrishna. Yeah. So even bad things, yes, do it. Because the thing is, look, what's the alternative? It means you do it and forget about God. Don't think of God. That means you think that God doesn't know what you're doing. Of course God knows. God is in your very heart. God knows better than you know what you're doing. You can't hide anything from God. So if you're going to do it, say, God, I know it's not good for you, but I'm going to do it. and now you have to take care of me. Right? You see, be honest with God. No matter how bad the thing is, you tell God about it. And then that itself, that even confessing to God. Confession itself is a form of prayer. We'll talk about this tomorrow. Pray without ceasing is the talk in the Hindu temple. A little plug. I hope to see more than 4 people there. Last time.
Those chairs are so uncomfortable.
Oh! Tapasya. We're talking about austerity.
We'll bring a cushion.
Chairs are cushion.
Yeah.
They already have the
Oh, do you think? Okay.
At my age, it's like sitting on.
Oh, you don't have to come. I don't want to guilt trip anybody.
I'll bring a cushion.
No, no,
I'll
you
bring my
don't.
own.
We give you a cushion chair, that cushion chair.
Bidutji is in charge of drawing in the crowd tomorrow.
There we go. They'll be floating off the chair because of his chanting. It'll be okay.
A guru at one time that said, I was trying to quit coffee,
Mm.
and it proved to be the most difficult thing think I ever had to quit.
Interesting, yeah.
And I complained, you tell me not to drink coffee, but it's so difficult. He said, next time, every time you have the urge to drink coffee, you just tell me, I'm going to have this coffee for you.
That's similar to what Trump said.
Something would happen. Like one time I was standing in line at Costco and I had this desperate urge to have coffee. And I said, as soon as I get out of this line, I'm happy to have a cup of coffee for you.
Right.
The line became like forever line.
Mm.
By the time I left, I didn't want coffee.
Yeah.
And like every time I would say that,
Right.
something would happen, I'd forget about it, or
Right.
something would happen, and I didn't want to do it anymore.
Yeah.
It really works.
That's
For
great.
me,
Thank you
it
so
works.
much. That's wonderful because that's a concrete example of how it works. Yeah. Because Girish Ghosh, that's a story that we say, but that's somebody, when you hear from somebody that you know.
I practice, it works.
That's great. Yeah. Thank you.
How about Tantra?
How about Tantra?
Yeah,
What do you mean by
that
that?
works. Well, doesn't it work similarly where everything that your desires are, good and bad, you apply them towards God. You create a connection to God through Tantra, isn't it?
It depends on the form of Tantra. I think there are different forms of
Well,
Tantra.
yeah, I'm
There's
just saying-
left-handed Tantra, Vamachala,
Well, yeah,
there are
we'll
other
keep
ones.
keep the other one away. So.
Yeah.
What is Tantra?
So, wow, but that's a big question.
Yeah.
I mean, but okay, yeah, it's very complicated. But philosophically, Tantra believes in Shiva Shakti, which means that the ultimate reality is not just Nirguna, impersonal, but also Shakti, Divine Mother. And there are certain practices within Tantra which encourage you, instead of to renounce worldly things, but to engage in it, but to bring God into it in some way. And it's difficult and dangerous for many people. That's what Sri Ramakrishna would say. He would say that, yeah, that is a path, but it's like entering a house through the scavenger's entrance. And it's very risky, and it's very easy to deceive yourself about it. But we can take the logic of Tantra, you would say, and even Sri Ramakrishna himself, he practiced Tantra, that's one thing, but even apart from the Tantric practice, in certain periods in his spiritual practice, he doesn't mention the gospel. He says, one day, I had this tremendous urge to wear a very expensive shawl. So I told Motur Babu, who's this very wealthy, his patron, I want to get me the most expensive shawl you can find. And Motur Babu runs out and gets this incredible gold embroidered shawl. He wears it for a second. It feels a little good. And then the next moment, the mind gets thoroughly disgusted with this. Throws it on the floor and starts trampling on it. Motur Babu, hey, don't trample on it. It's a very
Take it back,
expensive shawl. Take it back. So even he did that with a couple things.
Hubble bubble, remember
With the hubble bubble, the same idea, yeah.
Yeah.
And he says, I want, mind, this is a hubble bubble, and he enjoys it, which is something, it's a hookah, right? And then he tosses it away, right? So that's all, but that's exactly what we were talking about earlier, when experience something mindfully, and then
Letting it go.
eventually you either get tired of it, you'll realize that you're not able to get out of it what you're looking for. And then another aspect maybe to your question is something that Sri Ramakrishna, this is one of those things that is impossible to translate. He says, so what if you have lust or anger or greed? More fidya though. Give that worldly emotion or feeling a Godward turn. Turn it toward God. If you have to feel lust, lust after God. If you have to be angry that God is not revealing himself or herself to you. If you have to be greedy for God. So that's another way of thinking about this, kind of directing worldly feelings toward something higher, something divine. So I think there are multiple facets to that tantric practice. Yeah. Other questions?
So yesterday also I was asking you that you were telling me you got to answer it today about how did your mom, when you became Swami?
Oh, how did she react? Okay, slightly personal question, but anyway. It's pretty typical, actually. What did she do? She cried.
At first.
So she was crying quite a lot in the beginning.
Cried happy or cried?
No, in the beginning it was really sad tears. But she came around eventually. And after a few years, not just that, but as I told you, if you lead the life, they were not in this tradition when I grew up. They were Hindu, but in different traditions and whatever. But after I joined the order, and they saw the effect that becoming a monk had on me, they knew me from birth, right? They knew me better than anyone else, know me. And so they're like, wow, there must be something to this. And so then they start reading the gospel. They start watching lectures online of the different swamis, and they get interested. They were reading Leela Prashan's biography of Sri Ramakrishna, Holy Mother, and then next step, they get initiated. They're disciples of Revered Goswanamji Prasad. A few years ago, they got initiated. So they came to it later, a few years later. Now they're very serious spiritual aspirants. And so, yeah, that initial phase, she was very emotional and she was feeling bad that she was feeling especially guilty that they're like, oh, he's suffering so much, he's going through so much austerity. Especially, see, you have to understand, I grew up here, and then I suddenly just got a one-way ticket to India, and I moved to India. And you can imagine, you raise your kids here, right? Or you're raising your kids here. So you know, when you bring your kids for 1 month, that's one thing. But if you imagine your kid living in India suddenly, being deprived of the various luxuries that you get here, right?
And also a brilliant career.
Oh yeah, well yeah,
She was-
throwing that Berkeley PhD down the toilet,
Yeah.
and all these things, yeah. So there are a lot of things that are going through their minds. I can only imagine.
But she said people or.
No, do you think I asked her permission? No. So she knew. I mean, yeah. You think yeah. No, I bought the ticket before even I asked her. Or told. I didn't ask her. I just told her. I said, I'm leaving on this date, and I gave him copies. I gave my mother Bhakti Yoga, Swamiji's Bhakti Yoga. I gave my father Jnana Yoga. I did pronounce to them, and then I took the blessings and left.
And then Swami.
But they're not as bad as some parents. Some parents will, after the kid joins. In India, there are cases of where a kid will join as a brahmachari in Beluma, and the parents will send cops, will send police to bring them, to arrest the kids and bring them back. So my parents are better compared to them. Yeah. And they know I'm very stubborn, and if I put my mind to something, I'll do it. And so my mom in the beginning, she was like, which means, oh, my son is, he's engaging all this austerity, he's renounced so much, and we're just engaged, we're still in the world and enjoying so many nice things that he's not getting. So she was feeling guilty about those kinds of things. As a mother feels, she wants to pamper her kid.
But then when you were born and brought up here,
Yeah.
that you went to India.
Yeah.
What was your how did you feel?
Yeah, a lot of challenges. But that was why I went. I mean, I went for spiritual reasons, and I knew that it would not be easy. And so it was, the austerity of a lifetime, because anybody who's been to Kolkata in the summer months will know.
Yes.
April through July, August, oh my goodness. It's insanely hot and humid. You're just sweating through your clothes, and you have to shower 4 times a day. Waking up at 3:10 in the morning to attend 4 o'clock Mangalarati, which is meditation in Beluwan. But great joy also, right? Because it was bad karma of many lifetimes that you're exhausting through doing all these things. And having the company of hundreds of monks, inspiring monks, and that India is just saturated with this ancient spiritual culture. You just don't get that here.
Yes.
Yeah. At the same time, I have to say, when I left the US for India, I was very anti-US. I said, US is the land of materialism. It's all bad, and everything about it is blah, blah, blah. And I was idealizing India. It's the greatest, and it's purely spiritual. And then I go there, and then I come down here. And I greatly appreciate the spiritual culture of India. It's unique. It's really, it's a country like no other from a spiritual standpoint. And yet, it has very human failings and unique failings, actually. Swamiji noticed over 100 years ago, he said, one of the main national vices of India is jealousy, and it still hasn't gone away. Still there. Corruption, politics, all that's there. I mean, it's there. Much more than in the US. There's corruption in the US at the high levels and far less at the day-to-day levels. Whereas in India, it's almost everywhere. You have to bribe, you have to, it's disappointing and discouraging and unfortunate. But and then after 13 years in India, I started to recognize and appreciate the good sides of the US.
Yes.
You didn't mention
And
gun
many,
violence.
just one second, and many spiritual qualities in the US. You know? Things like professionalism, things like equality. Like I love, like in grad school, you call your professors by their first name.
Correct.
Unthinkable
Unthinkable.
in India, right? Your professor, in Germany even, Professor Doctor so and
Oh,
so.
yeah, they were
And but
wrong.
these are spiritual qualities. Swami Vivekananda said, Indians talk big about Vedanta, but practical Vedanta you'll find in the US.
Yes.
He said it. You find it far more. Sorry, I didn't want to, but yeah, I want to complete the thought. So
No
go ahead.
mention of guns here.
Of guns.
Such an ideal
Oh my
society.
goodness. Ideal society. Who's saying it's an ideal society? Guns is truly an American madness. I mean, I think it's crazy. Not owning a gun, I'm not saying, but it's just crazy. It's the form it's taken.
Hedonic treadmill,
What's the connection with the hedonic treadmill?
this guns, use of guns.
I don't know if that's it's not the concept I would use to explain it, but I don't know. That has a long history and it's complicated, and I'm not going to justify it because I think it can't be justified. It's the only country in the world where there's mass shootings regularly and nobody seems to care. It's very, very disturbing and troubling. And there's this gun lobby that's preventing any legislation from taking place. Yeah, it's very troubling.
Any other questions? We don't want to go too long because we've got another tomorrow. We want to the coming attractions and all that sort of thing, you know.
We don't want
Leave
you
them wanting more.
Vedanta out. Yeah, come
Yeah.
to a lot of-
That's one of the biggest secrets of.
I hope my guilt tripping worked a little.
Well, we want to thank Maharaj for this amazing. Again,
Yes.
what can we say, right?
Yeah.
We're so blessed.
Thank you so
so
much.
blessed. Yeah. So thank him by coming tomorrow. Also
Yes.
at 5 o'clock, we're gonna have Durji doing some.
But in the Hindu temple, not here.
Yeah, Hindu temple.
That's important
Hindu
to
temple. There, you out in TV land.
The Hindu and Jain temple of Las Vegas.
Yeah, Hindu and Jain. 5 to 7 more or less. It's going to be, Vidurji's going to do his chanting, then we'll have Swami right away. Obviously, we won't have an RT. So it's compressed a little bit, and we'll have some questions and answers, and then Prashad, these wonderful.
Boxed prasad afterward.
Thanks
And we have
to our
lovely prasad
devotees
here.
who have worked really hard to get that together. So thank you guys. And then, so tomorrow, we'll be at 5 o'clock. Coming attractions, we did not, sadly, Swami Arupeshanandaji couldn't come in November because he has an operation on his knee. So that's sad. But we also have Swami Chandrasekharanandaji coming from Portland for the weekend. So we don't have him just one day. We have, and that's going to be on the same dates, which is what, November. I suppose I should have gotten my demon device out.
Hypodermic needle.
Satan. So it's going to be the weekend of the 22nd, 23rd, and 24th. By the way, Swamiji, one of his requests, or he mentioned it, actually, he didn't say it was a request, was he wants to go see the Grand Canyon. So he's flying in on the 20th. The 21st, I'm going to drive him to the Grand Canyon. So we might have some room in the car for 1 or 2 people to come with us if you guys are interested. We're going to take the 2.5-hour drive to the little north-south canyon, I think they call it, where the little scenic walk is, as they say. So, but we're going to have then the 22nd, 23rd, and 24th. Maharaj will be here in the center. We don't know if we're going to do. We'll see what happens tomorrow about the Hindu temple as far as him talking there. But for sure, the 22nd, 23rd, 24th, it'll be the same setup where we're going to have a satsang on the 22nd, so you can get to know Maharaj a little bit, his background, questions, answers. Then the 23rd and the 24th, he's going to give a talk on the Bhagavad Gita. So he's going to give 2 classes on the Gita, which is great. And he's is he Bengali? Or?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yes, that's awesome.
I've never been.
Yeah, so and he's a very well known and very well respected lecturer and teacher. So anything else?
That's it.
Okay, so take it away, Swami. You can do the final chants.
Om Shanti 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 Hari Om Tatsat Shri Ramakrishna Arhamastu.
Thank you all. Oh, by the way, of course, there's food.
Yes.
So stay for a
Thank you so
sumptuous
much
meal.
for those who trouble to cook.
Okay, we're gonna end the live stream now. Goodbye, everybody online.
Bye-bye. Thanks for the question.
Yeah.